Okay, welcome. My name is Sachi Hayakawa. I'm an organizer with the New Economy Coalition and Reinvest in Our Power project. This call is the third in a series that is a collaboration between the Freedom Cities Network and Reinvest in Our Power. I want to give a quick shout out to all the organizations who are helping make it possible, including Freedom to Thrive, the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, Ella Baker Center, Million Hoodies for Justice, Policy Link, Center for Community Change, as well as the New Economy Coalition, Climate Justice Alliance, and Movement Generation Justice and Ecology Project. So obviously many hands were involved in making this possible, and we're so grateful for everyone who's able to join us today, as well as those who are going to watch the recording afterwards. The purpose of this collaboration is to create space for conversation, reflection, and imagination. We're so often clear on what our no is, the policies, institutions, and systems that are harming our communities. But being forced into this defensive place can often mean we don't have time to imagine, invest in, and create our yes. Our North Stars, our freedom dreams, our bread and roses. So in this call, we're going to really be exploring those places, and we're going to be digging into the how. What are the actual strategies and tools available to us to build the things that we need to survive and thrive, to return to right relationship with each other, and to organize for a just transition to ecological, economic, and social justice. Our first call was hosted by Adrienne Marie Brown and was a space to take a deep dive into our dreams of a more just and humane world. The second call focused on liberated ways to address harm and hurting, and we were lucky to have several brilliant community organizers in transformative justice work share their insights as well as their ongoing questions with us. We did have recordings of those first two conversations, and so we'll have members of our team can share the link to those in the chat as well as email follow-up from the call. There will be a fourth webinar in the series on May 28th at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 Eastern. And so we'll be sending out more information about that as we get closer as well. Before we jump into this, this conversation, I wanted to hand it over to Pearl for a few moments to make a couple quick announcements about logistics.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sachi, and really excited to have everyone on the phone together today. Just wanted to share a few housekeeping pieces. The first is that we are taking live notes. So one of my teammates will share the link for the live notes into the chat box. This is for anyone who might find it helpful to follow along via the live notes in the Google Doc. The second piece is we do have a question and answer section towards the end of the call. If something comes up as our panelists are speaking, really encourage you to share your question also in the chat box. Myself and Amanda from Freedom to Thrive will be moderating the questions, and we'll stack them based on what we feel is most relevant to our conversation. And if we do call on you, I would love to hear from your voice, so we will make you a panelist for a hot second so we can hear and see you as you share your question with us. Other pieces include that Yuki, who you'll see in the top row of panelists, is actually doing a graphic note-taking for us. So if you are a visual learner, really encourage you to highlight and spotlight Yuki's box as they visualize what our conversation looks like. Thank you, Yuki, already. There's a little drawing of Sachi there. And to support more visual learning and to sort of translate our ideas into illustrations, we have some artists on the call who will be taking what they learn, taking the main themes and translating it into various posters and designs. So I just want to share for a second some of what we have had created from our past webinars. So let's see. I'm going to share this really quickly. You'll see the live notes. You'll see some of our behind the scenes stuff. And then, yes, here we go. So we had Monica Mahapatra and Giselle Buchanan take some of the lessons from our webinars on transformative visioning as well as transformative justice and create these illustrations, and to support our translation of our ideas into art, to support our speakers and being able to share their time with us. We also encourage you to donate if possible. Any money raised on this call will go towards speaker honoraria as well as supporting our artists. The last piece I want to share is that we will be recording this conversation, so are currently recording. So if you need to adjust yourself based on that, I just wanted to make sure that was noted as well. Yeah, I'll pass it back to you, Sachi. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks, Pearl. So as you may have seen in some of the outreach in this conversation, we're really looking at the intersections of the fights against mass incarceration and the need to build strong local democratic economies. And I'm actually going to invite Anand Jahai from New Economy Coalition to share a little bit about his thoughts around that intersection.
Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm Anand. I'm an interim co-director with the New Economy Coalition. I work with Sachi. That's a great drawing of Sachi, Yuki, very accurate. So yeah, Sachi asked me to speak a little bit about this connection between essentially fighting mass incarceration and building new economies. And so I wanted to try to frame how I understand it with a little bit of a story. And if you've read Ruth Wilson Gilmore's book Golden Gulag, this story is going to be familiar. But I wanted to start us off, and there's a number of places where we could potentially start, but I wanted to start off in the early 1970s. And one of the important things that happened there was the post-war economic boom that had been going on in the US since really the 40s came to an end. And a number of things started to happen, but two of the really important things that started to happen in the economy was that the economy started to contract. So there was a recession, which we've lived through one recently, so we kind of understand what that means. But also something that was happening at that time at a new scale was that jobs, especially industrial jobs, were being increasingly automated and offshored. And so part of this economic contraction that started really in the early 70s was there was a rise in unemployment rates. And that rise in unemployment rates peaked in the early 1980s. And for those of you who do work on mass incarceration, you know that the early 1980s is also when the US's prison population started to really take off. And so unsurprisingly, this economic crisis was felt most acutely in Black communities and in other communities of color. So for example, in the early 1980s, when the US unemployment rate peaked at over 10%, the Black unemployment rate was above 20%, and it was much higher than that in certain communities or neighborhoods. So in our communities, this loss of jobs led to a pretty predictable sort of devastation. Poverty rates, substance abuse, violent crime, all of those things started increasing. And many of them had been on the decline for a long time, but they started increasing. And so I think for our communities, it was kind of clear what had happened, which was that capital had fled, jobs had left, and economic and social devastation had followed. There was still a need in our communities for food, clothes, shelter, education, healthcare, all of those things that an economy is supposed to provide for people, and that also historically government provides, but and especially at this time, a lot of those government services were being rolled back as well. And so what was really clear at this time was that the market economy was not delivering those things, and it was doing a worse job in our communities of delivering those things: food, clothes, shelter, education, healthcare. It was doing a worse job of delivering those things than it had in the past. And so to me, I think, and probably to a lot of us, a kind of obvious solution to that problem would have been to change our economy, to build a new economy that's centered around meeting the needs of people in our communities. But unfortunately, that's not what happened in the United States. And those in power instead used prisons to solve this problem. And prisons emerged as a place to warehouse surplus labor. And Ruth Wilson Gilmore and a lot of other thinkers talk about prisons as a place to just store labor that has become marginal to the economy. And especially in Black and Brown communities, because this was post-civil rights era, post-Black power movement, there was a concern that all of these unemployed marginal bodies would be potentially rebellious. And so it was also a way to quell political dissent. So I think that kind of context is what was established in the early 80s, and it's kind of defined our political reality for the last 35 years or so. And I think that it's really on us to build up that economy that will meet our needs. So much of the problems that we face in our communities are rooted in this economic devastation. And it's clear that capital is not going to meet our needs. And we need to be prepared to build an economy that will meet our needs for ourselves. I don't think that's going to solve the problem of repression and mass incarceration by itself. I think that it's really important that these strategies go hand in hand with some of the organizing strategies around police accountability and combating mass incarceration. But I think that it's an extremely important flip side of the same coin. So for me, that's why they're connected. So hopefully I've done a good job of framing that for this call today.
Thanks, Anand. And thanks, Yuki, for your illustrations along the way. We're going to be spotlighting Yuki's illustrations throughout the call. So as Anand mentioned, at NEC, the New Economy Coalition, we're constantly grappling with this question of how do we build what we really need and at scale. But we are very much inheritors of that question. Our social movements have a long history of building community solidarity economies to meet our needs, and especially when the dominant extractive economy has not. From the Black Panther Party to the Zapatistas to communities that are recovering from climate disasters, we have an abundance of resources and strategies available to us. So before we jump into the conversation with the speakers, I just want to share a few framing principles to keep in mind about why our social movements to end the bad must also be finding ways to build the new. So the first is we can't build half a bridge to liberation. This was something that I really learned as a student organizer working on divestment. You know, we were able to move those investments out of the fossil fuel industry sometimes, out of prison sometimes, but then they were getting reinvested into the next most profitable exploitative industry and shuffled around in Wall Street, and that wasn't a real solution. And so we have to put forth reinvestment demands to build the other half of that bridge and to really resource the solutions that we need on the ground. Which takes me to the next one. We're in a fight against false solutions. So we know that capitalism and the extractive economy are really creative. And even when we're able to build popular consensus around a problem, our opposition is often ready with a false solution that they can swoop in, present, and derive another profit from. And so we know real solutions will only come from those impacted by the problem. Third, self-determination is a seed of system change. We live in a culture that teaches us to be subjects and consumers, and that means that we need to be unlearning some of that passive participation and shifting the cultures in our communities towards shared power and self-governance and self-determination. So when our community members actually become agents of their own well-being, then we can all become stronger and we're able to build at a larger scale and we become capable of real system change. Fourth, as our friends at Movement Generation often say, if we aren't prepared to govern, we aren't prepared to win. So we have to build the muscles of deep democracy now. And a lot of times that means governance of our shared resources. If we're serious about shifting power to the people, we need to practice. And that means making shared decisions over resources, investments, initiatives, infrastructure, policy. Essentially, our communities must know how to make all the decisions necessary to meet our needs and to take care of our land, our water, our homes. Lastly, money should be a tool of the people. People should not be a tool of money. We have to reclaim extracted land, labor, and wealth and put it back into regenerative systems that sustain our people and our places. We need to be able to move capital from these private markets into community control, both as a short-term survival strategy and as a long-term transformative strategy. So I hope you can hold on to some of those ideas as we transition to highlighting the brilliant speakers who've been able to join us for this call and who are building democratic local economies from the ground up in their communities. So we're going to hear from two community formations who are building worker-owned cooperatives and community-controlled loan funds. We will learn more about what some of those kind of wonky technical terms mean as they talk, but they're using these tools as strategies for economic power and generating wealth for communities that have been at the front lines of extractive economy for a long time. Their organizing is embedding worker-owned cooperatives in broader linked infrastructure that can ultimately help shift political power and capital at a broader community-wide scale. Our first speaker is Doria Robinson with Cooperation Richmond and Urban Tilth. Doria is a third-generation resident of Richmond, California, and the executive director of Urban Tilth, a community-based organization dedicated to cultivating urban agriculture to help Richmond build a more sustainable, healthy, and just food system. She's also a co-founder of Cooperation Richmond, a Richmond-based and resident-led worker-owned cooperative developer, and a small loan fund that builds community-controlled wealth through worker-owned and community-owned cooperative businesses enterprises by and for low-income communities and communities of color in Richmond whose wealth has been extracted. Doria is also a certified permaculture designer, bay-friendly gardener, and nutrition educator. She's a dedicated food sovereignty, climate justice, and just transition activist, as well as the co-convener of the U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance, Western Region, and an active member of the Climate Justice Alliance and Richmond Our Power Coalition. Doria currently lives in the neighborhood where she grew up in Richmond with her wonderful 17-year-old twins. Our second speaker will be Najari Smith. Najari is the former chair and longtime member of the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee for the City of Richmond. Najari is a member of the Sustainability Committee for the Seed Commons, a national financial cooperative that collectively pools capital that is democratically governed and distributed to local loan funds. Najari is the founding executive director of Rich City Rides, a community bicycle organization established to increase bike access, reduce the cost of living, and create resident-owned cooperatives and community assets. Najari is a founding steering committee member of Cooperation Richmond, an organization that supports the development of worker-owned and community-owned businesses and assets. Co-op Richmond provides the coaching, connections, and capital to communities of color in Richmond whose wealth has been extracted through legacies of systemic marginalization, economic exclusion, and exploitation. And our third speaker will be Nia Evans. Nia is the first director of the Boston Ujima project. Nia joins Ujima's executive leadership after serving as the co-founder and steering committee member since 2015. Nia is the former executive director of the Boston NAACP, where she helped grow the membership and advance the chapter's education and economic development strategies. Prior to serving with the NAACP, Nia was an accomplished policy analyst and researcher with expertise in the fields of education and community development. Nia is a contributing researcher for widely cited education policy briefs and is co-creator of the Frames Debate Project, a multimedia policy debate project that explores the intersections of drug policy, mental health services, and incarceration in Massachusetts. Nia was also a school teacher and arts program founder in Inglewood, California, and served as an administrator at the Harlem School of the Arts. Nia has a BS in Industrial and Labor Relations from Cornell University and a Master of Arts Education Leadership from the Teachers College at Columbia University. So I'm excited to jump into the conversation, and I'm gonna let these three brilliant folks share more about what they're up to. But yeah, the first question I wanna present to you all is, how is your work reclaiming land, labor, and capital and restoring them to our communities? And we'll go in the order of introduction, so we'll start with Doria.
Hi, everybody. Really excited to be here. So how is our work restoring land, labor, and capital? Yeah. So a lot of different ways. So I think specifically Cooperation Richmond is taking the last 15, 20 years of work in Richmond, building up the Richmond residents' capacity and desire for self-determination, and directing that and empowering people to basically take back the economy through a variety of different means, but specifically by starting our own cooperatively run enterprises. It could be, anything that somebody dreams. It could be something that's just service-based enterprise that we need, like a laundromat or a bike shop, or it could be something that people are dreaming up. I think the big offering that we have is that for all of my life, for 45 years living here in Richmond, we've seen folks come in and try to help Richmond residents, right? And every decade there isn't much change in people's condition, right? In fact, it just seems to actually get worse. I think because people come in to bring services, whereas what Cooperation Richmond is doing, and what some of the other work that we're doing through our through Rich City Rides and through Urban Tilth, is we're actually trying to work with the people who are here to improve their capacity to lead and to drive this work. So the only way that we feel like we're really going to be able to return land and labor and capital to the people is actually by empowering people with the capital, connections, and that they need in order to build the infrastructure to govern themselves. So I feel like that's really what we're doing, is we're really working with people who are here where they're at, and through reinvestment, getting people here the skill sets, the connections, and honestly just the raw capital they need to actually lead in this work. So.
Thanks, Doria. Let's go to Najari next.
People of Richmond, are having their health sacrificed by polluting industries. Industries that buy our elections and buy our nonprofits. They power extractive systems, and we need to take that back. For Rich City Rides, bicycles are our Trojan horse to solidarity and liberation through cooperation. So what we do is we use bike rides and community stewardship to activate people, parks, and other assets throughout our city. Transform railways into bike paths, adding parks to bike paths and bringing bike hubs to parks as gathering spaces for community to come together. Things that we do are we take abandoned storefronts and we put cooperative bike shops in them. By having a cooperative bike shop, by having more of these businesses, we activate a belief in the possibility that people coming from legacies of enslavement, stolen labor, wealth extraction, and criminalization can create businesses, reclaim public space, and collectively purchase property to honor our ancestors and create legacies for our families and future generations to come. And through this, we gain one of the things that was robbed from us, which is our interdependency, our dependency on each other.
Thanks, Najari. And let's go to Nia.
Almost started speaking without unmuting myself. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for inviting Ujima to be a part of this conversation. So, a couple of things. First, Ujima is Swahili for collective work and responsibility. So I think already there are themes emerging with what we've heard so far from Cooperation Richmond. So I think one is just how we do work. So when I look at the question, which I think the question was something about reclaiming land, labor, and capital, and gearing it towards the restoration of our communities, what that makes me think about is process. So thinking about us doing our work collectively is addressing the how we do what we do. Which is pretty drastically different from the way a lot of us understand how things get done now, and who we should consider now. So just in uplifting and highlighting collective work and highlighting communities and highlighting groups as opposed to individual units. And even when we think beyond the mere individual and we think to who it's okay to care about as far as groups go, and usually that's family, and usually that is community that you identify with very specifically yourself, not necessarily communities that you may not consider yourself a part of. I think just when we think about how we're bringing together different types of people, and we're saying these are things that we should be doing together, that's one of the ways we are reclaiming our land, labor, and capital towards the restoration of our community, just in the how. The other thing is Eugenia calls itself an ecosystem. So again, much like Cooperation Richmond, there isn't just one thing that we do, and I feel like this is something Doria was getting at earlier, where people kind of come into our communities, they have this fantastic idea, and it's going to be this one thing that's going to fix everything. And our theory / experiment / just understanding from lived experience is what we are trying to change, so to speak, are systemic issues. And so then that means that one thing is not going to do it. There has to be a systemic response. So in that sense, we're an ecosystem. Our ecosystem is comprised of a community-controlled capital fund that you referenced earlier, Sashi. There's a business alliance. We have a technical assistance network. We have an anchor institution strategy, which looks at large institutions in our area, hospitals, universities, supporting our businesses directly as well as our communities. We have an alternative currency that we're actually going to start piloting tomorrow with Common Good. And then we have consumer organizing strategy. And I mentioned all of that to say that we are essentially modeling a different system. And so we're showing in real time what a system would look like if it were run by us. And so that's another way that I think we are reclaiming labor, land, and capital towards the restoration of our community. So at every step of an economic cycle, when we think about investment, production, consumption, and reinvestment, we are saying we are controlling every part of this economic system. We are determining how everything gets done, and we are determining for whom everything is done, and what will invest in.
Hi, so if it's okay, I'd love to add a little bit to, I was just really inspired by what Nia just said. And just to kind of put a point too on, what Nia was mentioning about how we're kind of doing this courageous work of thinking about ourselves as a bigger we, like acting in this bigger we. And that's actually, it's just not something we're used to at all, operating outside of our families or outside of our individualism. And I felt like it's just such an important point, because it's a tall ask, right? We have to relearn a lot of things we've forgotten about being in community. But I also wanted to just put a point on the restoring labor piece. I think for a good, I don't really even know how long it's been, but at least for a few decades, we've been on this track where the goal in our society seems to be away from work. Like work is this bad thing you're supposed to try to figure out how not to have to do, and like our idea of work is this thing that's like a burden, like you go and do this thing that you have to do in order to eat or in order to pay your rent and whatnot. It isn't a positive part of people's identity usually, especially people who are low income and people who have been, kind of excluded. And I feel like a large part of the work that we're doing by actually saying, let's do these cooperative enterprises, is trying to restore the notion of work as something that actually is a whole part of our identities, and that, our labor is not something to be sold to an owner, that we should own our own labor and own our own the profits of our own labor. And that's like one of the first points of liberation, is that we have to actually liberate our time and be, have self-determination over that, and over how our work is used to produce profit, right? Like we not only need to kind of benefit from any profits of our labor, but we should be able to direct, within the enterprise, what that enterprise is doing on a daily basis. Like we should not just be told, like somebody said once, that, the place that we spend the most time is our jobs. And it's actually the least democratic space that we're in. When you have a job, you come in, people tell you what to do and you do it, and then you go home. And I feel like this work is actually interrupting that and saying, actually, the workplace should be the most democratic space, and that we should have a stake in the governance of the spaces that we're in, and especially our workplace and what happens there. So I just wanted to add that in. I feel like if many, many more people start to spend a lot of time acting not only in a collective space, but in a democratic space where you're responsible for the decisions and the outcomes of those decisions, we will have a completely stronger, seriously, honestly, more self-determined society.
Can I respond to that? Thank you, Doria. I really appreciate that as well. And so that makes me think of a couple of things. Just first on the piece of valuing our labor, we have a time bank, and this is something that personally I wasn't myself super wild about, but I could see when we would talk about the time bank, community members would get really excited about this. And when I think about what the function that a time bank has in our communities now, I think this really hits the point that Doria talks about, which is just how, and Najari mentioned it earlier as well. First is how our labor has been stolen historically, and then today how it is undervalued. And so one of the things that I love about the Time Bank is it properly honors and values the gifts, the skills, the assets, the talents that we're walking with. And to Doria's point, that we can't right now sell at a profit, whether or not we wanted to do that. So oftentimes we're in situations where if we decided we wanted to do that, and if we decided we wanted to bid ourselves out, so in other words, get a job or find employment, we would not be able to. Our unemployment rates are 2 to 3 times the average in pretty much every community across America. And so what I love about something like a Time Bank, and that wouldn't be the only thing, is it says that we see each other and we value each other, and we value what we are bringing to the world. And then the second piece that makes me think of, and this is when Doria just talks about how our labor is valued and used today, it's an exchange. And so we are exchanging our gifts, our talents, our skills, and our with each other. And so again, this kind of disrupts this notion of, let me try to take advantage of somebody that I want something from. Let me try to get something as cheaply as possible. Let me keep information from another party so that I get the upper hand, or I'm on the winning end of this deal. Rather, it's we value each other. Let's make this exchange. And then on the piece on the decision making, that's super important too. So in talking about not just being collective but democratic in our collectivity, that's also important. And so one thing with our fund, for example, that is unique is when we launched in December, we launched the first democratically governed investment fund in the country. And so as Doria is saying, there is reclaiming again our labor, there's reclaiming our capital, and then what's super huge is what's that decision making process, and deciding how it's used and where it goes.
Great. He actually kind of foreshadowed the next question that I was interested in, which is what kind of tools and skills are you all using in your work day to day? Can you share more about what those look like, how you learned them, and how did you decide to start? And kind of just give folks more, like, help kind of fill in some of the details of what it actually looks like to be building cooperative economies on the ground. So maybe let's go back to Nia, just if you want to add anything else, and then we'll hop over to the Richmond folks after that.
Okay, sure. So we are multi-stakeholder. And so what I would say is, and I mentioned that to say, there are skills that we are developing along the way. So there does not seem to be a blueprint for the entire thing that we are doing, but there are blueprints for different parts. So for the fund, for cooperatives, for participatory budgeting, et cetera. But what has been really helpful, again, this goes back to the strength of a collective, is being able to work with people across different disciplines and expertise. So when Ujima started, Ujima started with a study group in 2014 that was convened by Center for Economic Democracy, which is Aaron Tanaka's organization, and Ujima is largely Aaron Tanaka's brainchild. City Life Vida Urbana, which is Boston's premier housing justice organization, and Boston Impact Initiative, which is a local impact investment firm. So in those 3 organizations, you see 3 different sectors represented, and really 2, finance and organizing. And so we had people with finance experience at the table. We had people with organizing experience at the table. And then when you look beneath those 2 sectors at the number of people we had involved, we had about 40 people involved in that study group. Then you saw special skill sets within those sectors. So then when you look at organizing, we had people skilled in housing, we had people skilled in immigration justice, we had people skilled in economic justice. And that group actually started to study what it would take to start a public bank. And then what I would say, we are continually developing skills. So we are continually, for example, because we are a very participatory structure, continually thinking about how we incorporate different voices, how we provide feedback, how we practice deliberative decision making. Because as you referenced in your intro, Sachi, practice is really important. So I would say, if someone were asking me, what do I need to do? What school should I go to? What program should I enroll in? I would say probably don't think of it that way. Probably start with what your skill set is, and then think about what else you would need to know, and then think about who is in your network that has that skill set, and then understand that as you're building what you're building, you'll figure out what else it is you need to learn along the way.
Thanks, Nia. Cool. Let's kick it over to Richmond. Najari, do you want to start? And you're on mute, just so you know.
Yeah, I could take it from there. So the question is like, how did you learn the skills, and why did you start? And a lot of that, I gotta give props and thanks to my first mentor, Babatunde Odesanya, back in 1997. He gave me my first legal job in his family business. He had this is back when I was living in Brooklyn, New York. And he gave me an opportunity at a young age when everybody else closed the door. And he taught me skills that I still continue to use to this day. And alongside Babatunde, we started up the first collective that I was ever a part of. It's a graphic design collective. This is before I knew what cooperatives were, or even the details around how collectives were run. And that was over 2 decades ago. And now I'm working with Cooperation Richmond to help start more cooperatives. I'm working with to support more cooperatives. I'm working with individuals through Rich City Rides who want to start businesses and enterprises, and I'm giving those skills over to them through the youth that I mentor and through the community members that join and visit the shop and take part in our activities. So the why has always been looking for liberation, finding ways to own my own labor, and wanting for myself what I want for others, which I feel is something that you have to do collectively. Going back to this saying that you can go by yourself, you can go fast, but together we can go far. So we're actually limited by the energy that we have together in moving is actually exponential. The more people we get involved.
Thanks, Najari. And Dory, I'm wondering if you want to share more.
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about the tools we use at Cooperation Richmond, because sometimes you have a name and you forget to say exactly kind of what you do. So Cooperation Richmond kind of was born out of this desire to make cooperative enterprises. And it kind of came into being after there was a bunch of groups who had come to Richmond, and they were doing these kind of really exciting workshops, webinars, kind of events that got people really excited about cooperatives, told them, what they are and whatnot, and then left. And then people were like, and where do I go from here? And how do I get this started? And they would be like, okay, so now go to this boot camp, and it would get them excited again. It would be over a long period of time. And again, at the end of the whole boot camp, they might have a business plan, maybe for an idea that they had, but it was like a huge gap between the excitement and actually having something on the ground. And especially the gap was huge for people who didn't have credit, who didn't have savings, who maybe didn't have a background in running any kind of business or knew anybody who ran any kind of business except for maybe businesses that they evolved themselves. And, you know, like not the ones that will keep you out of jail. And so it was just like, we really realized there was this huge gap that if we really wanted low income, minority led, people who have been extracted from, you know, left out of the economy to run and lead businesses, we needed to start with them and where they were. And we needed to provide the gaps that they needed. So that's what Cooperation Richmond does. It actually works one enterprise at a time. So we, you know, to have this intake process where people tell us what their idea is or tell us where their enterprise is, because oftentimes people have it up and running in some way, shape, or form. And then we kind of assess where they are and try to see what we could bring to the situation to make whatever they're doing stronger, so they can move towards being self-sustaining. And then we bring in coaches, people who are experts in the field, whatever field it is, to help the enterprise. It could be that they need help with accounting. It could be that they need help with, you know, becoming legal, you know, like becoming a legal entity or becoming a legal cooperative, or they might need help getting along with each other or having good agreements with each other. And so we actually co-create an action plan together, and then give capacity building grants to actually bring in people who, you know, are already experts in whatever it is that they're missing to help them build that capacity within the organization. Because at Cooperation Richmond, we don't believe we have to be everything to everyone. There are so many people within our kind of cooperative ecosystem who have expertise, have knowledge. We just need to get it to the people who need it. So that's really what we do. We reach out and bring people in to directly support the worker owners to develop their enterprises. And in that kind of function of co-creating an action plan for them and working through the steps of the action plan, a part of that is capital, a big part of that, because oftentimes the reason why our enterprises fail is people just didn't have the money to make it through to the point where their business is going to become, you know, profitable. You actually have to get to a certain scale of transactions and other things for that to happen. And so we actually connected with the Seed Commons, which is this amazing national network, a national financial institution that that supports the creation of small loan funds in communities like Richmond across the nation. So they're self-governed. So we govern, you know, who we want to kind of send to the Seed Commons, you know, board to, you know, recommend for a loan. So we can offer different types of loans to people. All of the loans are non-extractive, meaning that they do not require a credit report. They do not require collateral. And we never leave somebody worse off than what we found them. So if something goes bad and you can't repay the loan, then that's a loss for everyone, right? We just lose. It actually acts as incentive for each one of the loan funds like Cooperation Richmond to work deeply with each one of the enterprises we take on and see their success as our success. So it's really important for us to not think of ourselves as loan officers. Like, that's not what we're interested in. We're not interested in the repayment of a loan. We're interested in the success of a cooperative enterprise. That's what we're interested in. So all of our work is dedicated around making sure that each enterprise, no matter what hurdle they're facing, will be successful if they have the desire to be so. So, you know, that's for us is really kind of exciting to be able to do this kind of deep work. There's a lot of trust building, a lot of, you know, kind of understanding. You know, another part of the question was, you know, how do we learn how to be project officers? That's what we call the kind of folks within Cooperation Richmond who are working with enterprises, and by trial and error a lot. But honestly, another great thing of being a part of the Seed Commons, the National Financial Network, is that there's the peer network. So all of the small loan funds and communities across the nation, like Ujima, like Cooperation, Jackson, are actually in a collective together that shares information across the collectives called the peer network. And so there's an annual training every year that actually teaches you, how to work through a business model canvas, how to work through a loan. We kind of pool that knowledge together and share it across communities, so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel in every location across the United States. You can actually, be a member of this collective and help each other. So just recently we started these calls, and a group of folks who are all working with bike shops have a lot of similar issues that we're facing, right? So we're sharing stories and trying to figure out, well, how do we best deal with inventory? How do we best deal with, all of these kind of things, a member leaving the cooperative and needing to bring a member back in. So it's just a really powerful thing to have, a group of folks facing the same challenges you're facing, sharing information, sharing their discoveries. So we can all rise, so that's a big way of how we've learned. A lot of what we're doing is just within the peer network. We've learned through their trainings, we've learned through the exchange.
Awesome. Thank you, Doria. And I think Najari wanted to add something into that.
Yeah, I wanted to add in, I think part of the question was how do we get our start? And the start of it came from one of the youth that I mentored, coincidentally. During, we were doing like just community activities. We started off with doing these bicycle repair workshops on the Greenway. It's one of the parks that we now have a bike hub at. And it was this youth who, Josue Hernandez, who said that we needed a headquarters. And early on, we had wanted to have a bike shop and wanted to do it as a cooperative. And I kept telling him, about what a cooperative was. It was later the relationship that we had with the property owner, prior to him acquiring the space that the bike shop is in now. And that led to us coming to this space and being here.
Alert from System UI server. Low battery.
Now, from starting that business and finding the other cooperative members that we have that would be a part of our team, there was a lot of the back end work that needs to be done when you're running a business. Things like becoming incorporated, the legal incorporation, the coming up with bylaws. This was like a whole nother set of work, and that's what brought me to work with Cooperation Richmond, which supplied that back end. We are now, the bike shop is a California cooperative corporation. We've been working with Cooperation Richmond to finalize our bylaws. We've been working with Cooperation Richmond currently to work on inventory systems. And now we're looking to bring in some more worker cooperatives some more worker owners to join up with us. So I wanted to make those connections between how the bike shop works with Cooperation Richmond as well. In addition to that is the pilot loan that we got from Cooperation Richmond that helped us with shop improvements, as well as a line of credit, which helped us put more inventory into the shop. So this is kind of it's one of the things that motivates me to work with Cooperation Richmond, to because there's other enterprises out there that I know are having the same challenges. Being able to secure a loan when you may not have the credit to get it. Thank you.
Yeah, and maybe just add to that, like just to make it clear, sometimes when you're talking about businesses, you're like, what does this have to do with social justice? Like, what does this have to do with, the things that we fight for in activist spaces or just transition and whatnot. And I just wanted to say that, like, having a place to live, where you can actually afford to live where you grew up is an essential element to being able to actually have a voice in that space. Like, it's very hard for people who grew up in Richmond to be activists in Richmond if they're struggling day to day to just have a shelter over their head at night and not sleeping in their car and not like struggling, to just survive. So for us, this is an essential element to actually have people be able to be active is stabilizing their economic situation. The folks at Rich City Rides tried to go to all the different things that are supposed to be out there for small businesses in Richmond and were denied over and over and over again. They were given no help for the first, 2 years of their existence from all these structures that are supposed to help people like them, and just denial after denial after denial. They did this with like next to no money. They got this shop up and running, just some leftovers from a 401k. And who are the people within Rich City Rides? Historic Richmond residents, formerly incarcerated folk, immigrants who have grown up in this community, who have love for this community and actually will serve it. They're selling more than bikes than they're selling, at the bike shop, And so for us, supporting the development of honestly community-run organizations by people who are honestly, left out of the economic system is the first step towards this larger liberation and this larger we that then can go and really fight for the things that we need to fight for on multiple fronts.
Yeah, can I thank you, Doria. I just want to double down on that point. When one of the ways we describe ourselves is as the finance wing of organizing, and I'm glad that you asked, what does business have to do with social justice? Because as I mentioned earlier, a lot of us come out of organizing. So the 40 people that I mentioned earlier with the study group, the large portion were organizers and people representing grassroots organizations, with the people on the finance end representing a smaller portion of that group. And I mentioned that just to say we had pre-existing relationships when Ujima formed in Boston. And Boston's a small city, has amazing informal organizing infrastructure, and still with that, so still with our relationships. Some of us are from Boston, some of us are not. Still with our experience, there was still this question of, I don't understand what Ujima is doing. I don't understand what it has to do with us. So organizations, for example, who identified themselves as squarely within a social justice organizing space, we're looking at the finance work that we were doing, and it wasn't easily computing as a match. So I appreciate that you raised that, Doria. And so one of the things that we say is, there's really important resistance work happening. We wouldn't be here without this work, and you talked about that already. And there's a way in which this work, and this was one of the things that drew me to Ujima when I first learned about it, was there's a way in which, depending on where you are, participating in resistance work, participating in organization, while you're building power, is frustrating at the same time. And so this is why we're kind of talking about, not just knowing what's no, but knowing what's yes. For me, when I was with the NAACP, and this is where I learned about Ujima when I was at NAACP, I was faced with members who were saying, we're tired of going to hearings and testifying. And I'm not saying to say, let's stop doing that. But this is just feedback that we were getting with a big issue that was happening at the time, which was, we're going to these community meetings, we're going to hearings, we're testifying, we are, expressing our desires, and we're doing this in front of and to a bunch of people who are not aligned with us, and who are going to make the decisions that they want to make anyways. And they're kind of going through the motions. They have to do this community engagement thing, so they're doing it. And we are expending energy, and it's not to our benefit, and it's frustrating, and it's annoying, and this has been happening over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And so what I appreciate about this is this takes us out of the position of asking people to value us the way they should value us. It takes us out of the position of asking for permission to bring about the things that we know we should have in our community. So that's a super important point. The other reason that study group that I started was convened. So I said, there's a study group to start a public bank, and it was looking at two things. The reason they convened the study group was, one was to address exactly what Najari and Dory are talking about, which is we have small businesses in our communities who were looking for capital. Expertise is there, drive is there, passion is there, idea is fantastic. They don't have the capital, and jumping through hoops, and still can't get the capital after the hoops. So there was this question of, okay, how do we solve this problem, specifically for small businesses in our communities? And there was a recognition that there was a similar problem with our grassroots orgs. So similarly, our grassroots orgs are in this hamster wheel of a funding dance, where they're figuring out who's friendly amongst the funders, who's not. The less unfriendly ones, and I say that not antagonistically, but just as far as like mission alignment, do they really understand, et cetera, et cetera. Also have, hoops that orgs are jumping through, not a lot of money for not much time, given the extent of the work that we're trying to do. And even the friendlier funders are operating within the constraints that they're operating with. So there's this question of how do we figure out a sustainable source of financing for ourselves, and so that's huge. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Doria, because for some of us who we're kind of feels like, if we're delving into the business side of things, and if we're delving into the finance side of things, that kind of feels like maybe we're participating in activities that we shouldn't be participating in. It doesn't seem like it goes with organizing. This is where I see the value is creating sustainable sources of financing for ourselves, and taking ourselves out of the position where we're going to people that we know do not value us, and asking them to allocate resources toward us.
Great. This is all super juicy, and I just really appreciate everything that's being shared. We're gonna have a few more questions in this section, and then we'll pivot to the audience Q&A. So I just wanted to reference back to the last webinar that we had, which was focused on transformative justice. And one of the things that we talked about during that call in terms of building a system beyond policing and prisons as they are today starts with first getting in right relationship with each other on a one-on-one level. And so I was wondering if you all have are able to speak to how new economy institutions and community-based institutions that we're creating allow us to practice being in right relationship with each other and relating to each other in different ways than kind of the dominant workplace or other institutions, schools, et cetera, that we're put into that create more inequitable dynamics. And yeah, so I think whoever wants to kick it off can just go for it.
I'll start, and I'll try to be brief. I feel like working in these spaces, really allows us to exercise the muscle of cooperation. It's not a muscle that we, in the United States, at least, I think use very much. I think we've really forgotten and lost it, especially folks who are not, coming from an immigrant experience. You may have different reference points. I think that even within our movement, like the desire to collaborate and cooperate is something other than the practice, and that we have a lot to learn about how to do this right, how to do this respecting everyone within that cooperative circle's wholeness. I think that the more that we move into this work, the more that it becomes clear that folks really are not used to working with populations of people who have self-determination, who value it, and who want to actually use it. It's like almost like a surprise, and they don't really know how to act, like when residents, when people kind of step up and say, we're here, we're working on something, and we want to collaborate with you, but it's going to be mutually beneficial. It's going to be negotiated. We're going to talk this through. You're not going to come in and kind of dictate, but we're actually, like, the mechanics of collaboration, the mechanics of cooperativism is something that doing this work kind of forces everyone who's involved to kind of dive into. I'll just leave it there and kind of pass it on.
Do you want to go, Najari? I can go next. I'm just looking at the question again. Okay, so how do new economy institutions allow us to practice relating to each other in new and different ways? So I think we've been saying, well, and practice is in the question. We've been saying practice a lot, and so I would say that is the crux of it. And when I think about specifically new economy institutions, what that makes me think of is what are the principles embedded within new economy. So then and what we're talking about today is that there are principles that we're just not used to putting into action. And so whatever our institutions look like, we think about how we have opportunities to put those principles into action and practice them wherever we can. And I would say in the case of Ujima, we're definitely very early in that. One thing that we do is we have weekly meetings. We have weekly member meetings. So there's just so the idea there is there's regularity and frequency. So just a regularity and frequency of people coming together is a specific type of practice, but that isn't enough. So this isn't unfamiliar to a lot of people who do meetings. We have ground rules. But again, even though it can feel like an exercise and it can feel like a formality, I do still think it's important that that's the whole point of practice, is that things just start to become secondhand. And then if I were to think right now about what we could be doing differently with our ground rules process, for example, because there are definitely moments where someone is not following a ground rule, but we do it. Everybody says, great, thumbs up, I get it. And then to Doria's point, somebody's taking up a whole lot of space that they shouldn't be taking up. And then our job is to figure out then, what is our response in the moment. And that wouldn't just be for Ujima staff, but for Ujima members as well. And this is where I say we're early in this process. When we were first forming, because we're multi-stakeholder and multiracial, one thing that we were aware of is that there are going to be people with different class backgrounds and people with different racial backgrounds. And so we said, okay, we want to think about anti-racism training. We want to think about thinking about classism. So we know that there are organizations like Resource Generation, for example, that talks about dealing with class privilege. And so that's work that we're still trying to figure out, just in terms of what exactly does that look like? Who do we partner with to do that? What's the process for new members coming in? We've talked about a values committee that hasn't formed yet, but that's a part of our plan, is for there to be a values committee, and then thinking about where restorative justice plays in Ujima writ large. Does restorative justice reside with the values committee? And so yes, I guess I'll just end there with just saying, thinking just about how the principles within New Economy actually shows up structurally in our institutions, so that they're not just values that we're espousing. And so we're having opportunities to practice them, and they are part of our structures, such that they become secondhand.
Thanks, Nia. Najari, did you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, just a bit. So I'm in the sustainability committee for the Seed Commons. That's the National Financial Cooperative. And within the Seed Commons, we make decisions on loans democratically. We have weekly call-ins that we do. We'll review loans in different locales to make decisions. In addition, within Cooperation Richmond, we have a deeply democratic process. And also from the standpoint of working within a worker-owned cooperative, we have monthly meetings where we come together to make decisions around, what vendors are we going to use? Where are we going to put the POS system? Just lots of different moves within the shop to make sure that we're on the same page with each other. It's been helping us over the past 4 years.
Cool. Okay, so I just want to ask you all one more question, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So I think something that is really challenging about this work, but that you all have found ways to do, is to build these transformative institutions within the confines of the existing systems. That's kind of the mechanical piece. The spiritual piece is living in the world as it is and as it should be. And finding ways to navigate the contradictions that come up about that, and how to hold a beautiful vision of where we're headed and stay grounded in the reality of where we are. And so I'm wondering if you three could offer maybe a little bit of something you've learned, or something that helps you to do that work on a daily basis.
Can you chat the question or repeat it, Sashi?
Yeah, totally. So how do we work, how do we build transformative institutions within the confines of existing systems? How do we live and work in the world as it is now, and build a world as it should be?
Mm-hmm. So I don't want this to sound trite, but it's true for me. So one of the things that was very compelling to me about Ujima when I learned about it was that it was, for me, it was something that was action oriented, just kind of in the landscape of things. And by that, it's not to say other things were not, but there are specific types of actions. And I think this is what we've been talking about in this conversation. So just in Boston, there were lots of, you could go to lots of community meetings and predict that at the end of a community meeting, somebody would say, we know the problems, what are the solutions, what are people actually doing about it? And one of the things that was compelling to me about Ujima was I could point to it and say, this is something that people are actually doing, and you can actually jump in and participate actively. So again, juxtaposing that against talking to the body of people who are going to be the ones to do something, and then trying to persuade them or convince them to see things your way. And so the reason why I say this is going to kind of sound trite is, for me, what's really important about Ujima is just it's the trial. And Doria talked earlier about learning through trial and error. I think there's something just really powerful, particularly in Black communities, about a group of people who decide, I'm going to do something and I'm going to try it. And it is not going to be perfect, and there are going to be challenges, and it may even fail. And I think that that's powerful because, you know, no, there just are not enough pressures for Black people. So what we have to add to that is be perfect. And if you can't show us that you're going to be perfect, then you can't get an opportunity. And we're talking, I believe this also plays into what we talked about earlier when we talked about businesses run by Black people and other people of color not being able to receive capital. Because we can't show necessarily that it's going to be a surefire thing, and that's up for debate. So for me, that's super powerful. And so then I think, I feel like an impact that I've seen that we have had in Boston is then I've seen other people say, okay, I'm going to try this. And it's not necessarily a fund. So for me, that's how you do it. And I also mentioned that again, just within a context of, we have this amazing organizing structure where all of this resistance work is happening. So what was also important for us was not to trample on that, and not to interfere with that, and not to take away oxygen from that, but to be respectful of that and to consider how we are adding to that infrastructure. And so then that means that we have two kinds of work happening at the same time, and they're supporting that. So there isn't an organization or a group of people that feels pressured to do everything. So that's what I would say is go ahead and say, we're going to try. And if you've done the work that you're supposed to do beforehand, so that means you've done the relationship building, you are actually in right relationship with your communities, I think you will receive grace to make mistakes and to figure it out.
Thanks, Nia. Najari and Doria, do you want to add anything to that?
I think I'd like to jump in. Nia hit on so many really just ultra real points. It's hard building a bike while you're riding it. If you've never seen something done, it's hard to imagine it. I was fortunate to at least see the early stages of a family business getting built. Having this cooperative shop here and having somebody come through the doors and say, who's the owner of it? And me and Tay and Josue, we all, we can enter that, we can start that conversation around what a cooperative is. You know, our bike shop is the only cooperative in Richmond. We were hoping to see many more, but if you have never seen it before, it's hard to imagine that it's even possible. And I think a large part of the work that we do, even beyond having a business, it's more than a business, it's a community space. It's being able to activate that possibility in the minds of the folks who visit us and, you know, join us on our other activities and, you know, are exposed to that. It's you know, it's important to note that the fact that we're so deeply connected connected to the community through the things that we do outside of the bike shop, and the fact that we live in the community where our business is at, it also has a remarkable effect. It's people can engage us outside of work around what is the shop and what is Rich City Rides and how did that happen. I guess we really need to support the folks who have the courage to do it. Mm-hmm. And it's important having the space to fall once or twice while you're learning to walk is crucial. You know, that ability to rebound and bounce back. It's not something that, you know, and I guess in a dominant extractive economy, they have that. You know, it's way more capitalized. But we actually need to have that support if we really want to see these cooperative, community-owned enterprises thrive. So just wanted to lift that up and shout out all the folks who are doing it and inspiring others.
Totally. Thanks, Jari. Doria, I don't know if you want to add anything. No pressure.
Maybe just quickly, because I really want to get to participant questions. But
Yeah.
I feel like for me, you know, it's been 15 years working with urban tilth, kind of transforming, you know, neglected, forgotten, blighted spaces within our community into gardens and farms and whatnot. And I think that's been a really kind of instructive practice. It was almost like the 15-year meditation of standing in front of a space that was just full of trash and just destroyed and be like, you know, welcome to our garden. And everybody would look around and like, what the hell are you talking about? That's not a garden. You know, and then, you know, in 6 months, you know, it is, you know, and going through that process with community members, especially as, you know, you have kind of the pushback of like, you know, vandalism or, you know, somebody tries to take the property back or whatever. I feel like it was this huge metaphor for how you build something, you know, how you work through, you know, trials and tribulations and like, and hold a vision in your head. And just have utter commitment to that vision and know that if you show up for it and if you put in the energy that the fruits will come. So for me, the practice of urban tilth, the practice of urban agriculture is actually like almost like a spiritual practice. It's like a meditation on how you transform the world that we live in into the world that you need to live in rather than the world that we were born into. So I think that that's my kind of short answer to the question, is that I always keep those metaphors in my head, even when I'm working in an economic space or if I'm working in a land space. I'm keeping that same metaphor in my head, you know, of how you transform, how you make this transformation from blight and destruction and degradation to life.
Beautiful. Thank you. All right, I know time is a little tight, but we definitely want to get to some audience questions. So I'm going to hand it over to Amanda with Freedom to Thrive to help us do that.
Yeah, sounds good. Looks like we may only have time for 1 or 2 questions, but we first wanted to take a question from Owen Burson. So I'm going to let you in, Owen, a question that you had about access to land. You should be able to speak up.
Okay, can you all hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Awesome, thank you all so much. I was gonna ask, do any of you all have insight into how to acquire space that's affordable to worker co-ops that are starting up and don't have a lot of access to capital, and also for organizations that are working to support the development of worker co-ops, which also support organizations don't have a lot of capital. I'm talking as a volunteer from Center for Cooperative Development and Solidarity in East Boston, and they're struggling a lot with how expensive real estate is here and a lot of issues around gentrification and displacement. So, thank you.
So I'll keep it quick because I know we're out of time, but since I'm in Boston, so I know CCDS is actually a grassroots partner of Ujima, and is going to be fiscally sponsored pretty soon by Center for Economic Democracy. But I'll just point to the fights for land that are happening in Boston. So there's the Right to the City Coalition, which is part of a national community land trust movement. And I know even when we're talking about community land trusts, we're still talking about expensive land in Boston. And I saw that Doria chatted it. I there are just also conversations in Boston just about public parcels and what's going to happen with the public parcels in Boston. So those are active fights that if CCDS is not already actively participating or supporting them, I would say they could do so.
Yeah, maybe just to quickly add, just reiterate what I wrote in the box, and then add a couple of things. I think we didn't get a chance to talk about how I think both Ujima and Cooperation Richmond are really working in a much larger movement context. I think Nia kind of referred to it, but we're not standalones. We're a part of a movement. So within Richmond, we participate in Cooperation Richmond. Within the nation, we're active members of CJA, working with Reinvest in Our Power and whatnot. So there are movement entities who are explicitly working on land policy that we, exuberantly support. So in Richmond, there have been folks like ACE and CBE who are working on public lands for public goods policies. Because, we shouldn't just be fighting for that garden to have that public space, but also, our cooperative businesses need public long-term space. And then, yes, how can a community land trust, take in land if we're able to get it in the first place, through whatever means that we have that we're using, keep the prices down, so that speculation doesn't push people out of being able to run their businesses. So we need to, really being inclusive of, business is also a realm that needs to be included in land justice issues. Because if you can't make a livelihood for yourself, then, it's a piece of the puzzle as well as housing, as well as food. All of these things need to be a part of our larger conversation.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you too for your answers on that. I know that we're at time. There's been some requests to extend by about 5 minutes, so we can take one more question. Our panelists, are you all able to stick around for one more question? Yeah, great, appreciate it. So Annie, someone with the name Annie Contractor, wanted us to raise up this question. How have you addressed the patterns of patriarchy and other forms of concentration of control within the governance of your organizations? I've seen gendered power dynamics, white supremacy, and a deference to traditional structures, specifically male clergy as the default leaders, assumed spokespeople, etc. This has emerged in other cooperative spaces, even when democratic processes are held central. So if our panelists have some thoughts on this, we'd love to.
Sure. So just really quickly, I mean, this just makes me think of the previous question about practicing. And so I would just say similarly for Ujima, we're early in that. So for example, we had a culture retreat yesterday, a staff retreat that was just kind of early conversation just about what our culture is, how democracy is or is not showing up. We'll have future conversations about how white supremacy may be showing up, how patriarchy may be showing up. And yeah, just in the interest of time, I would say my answer would be similar to the previous answer I'd given.
So within Cooperation Richmond, we again learned the hard way that you have to be really intentional and deal with this stuff up front and on purpose. Because even, the most intense movement allies, we, no matter what our intentions are, we're kind of grown up in this larger culture, and implicit bias and other things just really make themselves known when you get into certain situations, especially around the allocation of resources and and kind of reading people's behavior, trying to understand what's happening. People think they're not drawing upon these bad things we have inherited from growing up within the beast, you know, but people do, right? People do draw on, you know, implicit bias that is governed by white supremacy. So, you know, for us, we've had to, at times, stop everything to deal with it within our organization. Bring in outside facilitators to do a whole, like, you know, even within a super left community, what happens and how do we deal with implicit bias and white supremacy and you know, especially around anti-Blackness. I think it rears its ugly head so often, even within movement spaces, even within POC spaces. And the hardest thing about it is that people don't believe they're doing it. And it's hard to point out, you know, some of your movement heroes that stuff's happening. So I'd say if you're, you know, venturing on into creating some kind of a organization like this, on the upfront, spend some time developing your culture, not declaring your culture, but practicing and developing your culture actively, and bring up these things even if you think that you don't have to bring it up because you know your people and they're not like that. Bring it up anyway and go to the mat on it, and before you have to in you know, when you're out like practicing in community. Make sure that you've been there, done that, and have some internal tools to deal with it when it comes up, because it will come up. If you've grown up here in the United States, or even, you know, you could probably say it internationally, it will come up. Yeah, my thing is just to deal with it up front and practice, deal with it in practice, not just in declaration.
Awesome, thank you for that reminder. Wanted to give Najari a chance to jump in on this if there's anything you want to share, and then I think we can close.
Yeah, Doria hit on it precisely. Yeah, taking that moment in the beginning of your organization to establish that culture. Anti-Blackness is a real thing that I've had to encounter, you know. Even outside of like Cooperation Richmond, we're just trying to find the resources to establish our cooperative. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Well, we're 7 minutes over. Appreciate everyone sticking around to dig in more. I'll just pass it back to Sachi to close it out.
All right. Thank you so much, Tania, Najari, and Doria, for sharing your stories, your time, and your brilliance with us. Just really grateful. I also want to recognize everyone who helped make this webinar possible, from tech support to taking questions to the artists, and then also to the audience for showing up and sharing your questions. There's some really, really insightful, deep questions in the chat, and so we'll try to really collect those and share them and have questions or a resource too. So we'll be trying to share those afterwards. We will have a recording which we can send out, and as Pearl mentioned at the beginning, anything that folks can chip in to contribute towards supporting the speakers and artists who are part of this as well. And then keep an eye out for the fourth call in the series, May 28th. And we'll be sending more information about that as well. And finally, shout out to Yuki, who's been diligently illustrating for the last 98 minutes. We'll be sharing this creation with you all, and I'm really, really excited to see what she's been working on over there. So I think that's it. Anything I forgot, team? All set? All right, take care, everyone. Have a good afternoon, evening. Be well, stay safe. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sachi.
Thank you, Sachi and panelists.